Welcome to On the Bench. I'm your host for this episode, Brendan Sinone. I'm joined by Zach Blostein, Chris Nee. Gentlemen, happy Halloween.
Yeah, trick or treat.
What's your guys' favorite candy?
I mean, I'm a Reese's guy.
Oh, I was going to say the same thing, Chris.
Pieces or cups? Cups, right?
Cups.
You know what I actually do love is Take Fives, which is a Reese's product. I don't know why. I love a good Take Five.
Those get pretty good reviews. They're pretzels.
There's reviews?
Yeah, I've heard like
they have 5 items in them. Pretzels is among them. There's enough sweet. There's enough salty. It works perfect for me.
But you've never seen like Mike Golick do a review on Twitter, Zach?
Halloween candy?
Yeah, he does all sorts of candies.
I thought you were talking about just like the neighbor's kids coming over and being like, oh, what candy are you leaving out?
5.5 out of 10. Not very good, Mr. Sinone.
Oh, we got a little bit of everything here because I went shopping with my youngest, and well, that's never a good idea. He'll hear this probably in my wife's car and be like, he's right. I think we got Krabby Patties, from SpongeBob. We have a bag of like old candy, like Tootsie Rolls and those type dots are in there. I think things like that. And then one that's more like the, my personal favorites. I think there's Twix, M&M, Reese's in one bag. So and we had a bag last night that we used at one of Carter's events for Lincoln baseball. So we've had way too much candy in this house.
There's a strategy. So he got that old candy to put on the top to make sure that gets all cycled through, and then the good stuff is at the bottom.
Well, he said the Krabby Patties are for the real ones who stay out late.
All right, as we get going here, there's a lot of really good questions that our listeners asked. I want to get to those. I have some of my own questions for you guys, but before we get going, a shout out to our sponsors, Chattanooga Whiskey. Their product is as sweet as some Halloween candy. Like in all seriousness, like their toasted finished stuff is delicious. It's sweet, chocolatey, malty, really, really good stuff. Chattanooga Whiskey. You can find them all throughout the Southeast, all throughout the state of Florida at this point. Publix liquor stores, your local shops, like they're everywhere. They're 111 proof, highly recommended if you're looking for a stronger proof offering at a lower price. One of the most affordable and certainly the highest quality, like bang for your buck whiskey out there. Then we'll be doing a lot of Buyer Sinone today. Our Buyer Sinone sponsor is
the Turner Group.
The Turner Group. Good job, guys. Wow, great energy. Sorry, Colin. If your house is haunted, see, we're sticking on the Halloween theme. Look, guys, I even got a skeleton on my shirt here. And you want to get out of there. You're like, no poltergeist for me. Not for me. I don't want to be haunted anymore. Give Colin and Amy a call, and they will help you move. And that's the whole. Sorry, Colin, this is an awful pitch. But in all seriousness, if you're in the state of Florida, Central Florida is where they're specified, but you can get pretty much anywhere in the state. In Tallahassee, they have Griff up here. They can help you either get a permanent dwelling. They can help you if you want to get a place that you want to rent out to people. And Zach has had a lot of success. His family has had a lot of success doing that. They can help you get where you want to go, literally. So the Turner Group will help you out there. All right, guys. Mike Norvell spoke on Monday, weekly press conference. For the Ask the Tough Question crowd, Chris, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 for tough questions, 9-ish?
I mean, I think that crowd would disagree that they were tough questions because we didn't yell at him to fire somebody. But in general, yes, that's in season, probably about as gritty as it's getting. I thought his answers were relatively quick and worthwhile enough for what a coach is going to say in a setting like that.
I want to go through some of the questions, some of the answers, and I think we've all listened to Mike and been around him enough to where we can kind of decipher and decode, because there's still some coach speak there, but I did appreciate, like, he wasn't defensive. I thought he was willing to answer everything, was transparent as much as I think he was comfortable being without giving away strategic stuff or throwing it into one another bus, stuff like that. Zach, real quick though, your thoughts. You went back, listened, saw the transcript, wrote one of the stories on one of the main takeaways from that press conference. I guess what was your general thoughts on the tone, what was asked, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I thought there were some really good questions asked. I'm just a huge supporter of the tough questions crowd. I think you guys need to be harder on him, honestly. I want some yelling. I want some name calling. No, but in all reality, I think that he did a solid job answering those questions. I think that, when you usually watch a Mike Norvell press conference or you're there for it, like, you're not expecting to come away with a ton of insight into maybe some of the, the tougher questions that are asked. And, I think him realizing the situation that he's in and where the program is right now, and being a little bit more forthcoming in a press conference setting is a good thing. And I think that was the case on Monday, especially, we'll get into it, but like, some of the specific questions about coaching changes, some of the plans for the offseason, like a lot of those questions that, maybe a couple months ago, if they were asked, like you probably wouldn't get as much insight. I think he realizes this is the, press conferences are a chance to reach the fan base as the head coach. And he realizes that. And I think he did a good job of answering those questions as much as he can.
Yeah, press conferences have also shifted from caring about the opponent to you're 1-7. It's the last month of the season. Like that's where we're at. Like I understand people are interested in that question. Basically, when you're 1-3, I get it, but there's still, especially from a coach who is always thinking simply about the week ahead, there's a degree of he's not going to be as probably open to answering that question on October 1st as he is as October is closing out.
This did seem like a swing. Just I think losing to Miami, the Duke game really was kind of the significance coming off that bye week, and that was kind of your last stand, I think. And then Miami's off the table now, and you're in that final month here. So let's get into it, guys. Go through and decode some of what he's talking about. This is a segment. What do it mean? All right, first question. Basically about coaching changes. Is that something you have to consider in a season like this, in season? Or is this more of a we need to get through it and address it in December? Mike says, quote, and there's going to be some ellipses in here. I don't want to read the entire, all of it. I think that would be pretty boring audio, but we do want context for the people who haven't gone through and watched the press conference or read the transcript. He said, my number one focus is doing everything for these players to go win this week. What are we doing for that? I'm watching all aspects of our program. I'm watching how our players work. I'm watching how our players, the effort that they give, the intent which they bring. I'm watching our coaches and all things that we're doing. That's my primary focus, is that these guys are getting every opportunity to go be successful come Saturday. And as you go through the year, if you see something change in that regard, and I feel like that it's best for our team to make a change in an area, then I've got to be willing to do that. That is part of my job, but I do believe in the opportunity that's ahead. So that was the extent of it. So Chris, thoughts on that answer and how do you decode it?
I think that answer is largely I don't like dismissing coaches in season.
Same.
But I am
agree.
going to make a consideration with regards to what guys are doing in season when I do reach a point to make that decision.
I agree. Zach, are you similar? That basically him saying in season, winning each week, kind of similar there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he sees a ton of value in it. And then in large part, I agree with him. Like, I don't think there is a ton of value in firing your coaches in season. Obviously, there's exceptions to that. Like, I think they could make some changes, but it's not going to change much, right? And if you are going to make those changes, you're likely going to be making hires in the offseason to try and replace some of those roles. And I know you can put interim people in those roles, but I thought his answer was good. Like, he's addressing it because it is a thing that fans are bringing up consistently and that we've talked about. But I don't think it's the most pressing issue, and I'm fine with his answer about it.
I think you do it in season for a messaging standpoint more so than a change standpoint. For example, I'll use Ron Dugans. He currently has no wide receiver commitments. His room isn't playing any good. Like, it's fair to discuss him as someone who's probably under the microscope in this conversation. If you moved on from him right now, the only change is day-to-day coaching in that room with that position group. It probably truthfully gets worse because there's not anybody immediately on your coaching roster who probably steps in and is an equal to Ron Dugans in the sense of the experience of being a wide receiver coach. That all being said, that position group is not performing at any kind of level that is even near optimal. So I think it's more a motivation to the players of, hey, there's repercussions. Like, your performance to some degree costs this man his job. And again, hypothetical in this situation. So I think that's why you do it. But yeah, to Zach's point, you can't go hire a receivers coach on October 31st if you're firing a receivers coach on October 31st, because more than likely the guy you want to hire is coaching somewhere else and coaching out the season, at least the regular season.
I think the chance there's going to be some nuance here with the timeline that I do want to kind of go over real quick, guys. I think the chance for the messaging part, Chris, I think that's gone. Like, I think
that was really the first buy, or the Duke week buy.
The Duke, or after the Duke game. Like, if it was just going to be a performance, like, this is
especially because that was viewed internally, from what we understand, as sort of a reset, and obviously that didn't come about.
Yeah, they're going.
And the receivers, like, they didn't lose you that game. They're a large reason.
It was a season with a lot of bad performances for that group. It was probably the worst.
When a ball hits you in two hands in the end zone and you don't catch it and you lose by possession
on the first ever throw, by
a big role.
The betrayal was, and not that it's done intentionally, and when I use the word betrayal, but true freshman quarterback uncorking the ball.
His first ever throw down the field.
Yeah, and it's a dime and it's dropped. I mean, and just like at that point, then the amount of drops FSU had in that game, they searched and were number one nationally in drop rate too, or number 134, I guess, depending on how you look at it.
We're number one in something.
We're number one. We're number one. So with the timeline of in-season firings, I think we've kind of moved past the portion where it makes sense, right, from a messaging standpoint. And I do think the point you guys have made that, like, it doesn't behoove you, doesn't help you develop and go through the season short a staffer, even if you feel like that staffer is not optimal to FSU caliber, which I think we're going to see change. And there's certainly enough evidence at this point based on how the season has gone that to where, you're going to make changes. But with this calendar coming up, early signing period is earlier, and the transfer portal is a week. Opens a week after early signing period.
Early signing period is now December. I think it's 4th to 6th. It's during that championship week there in the middle of it. And then December 9th, I believe, is the date that the portal officially opens. It's basically open for roughly 3 weeks from that point on. So, like, the season ends and you crash right into both of those things immediately. So I do think that's why you see more in-season firings seeming to happen nationally this year. But again, like, if FSU were, again, in the hypothetical to move on from Ron Dugans, I don't know that when you're talking to a Javon Boggs or another receiver target, if you really can definitively tell them, hey, this is most likely going to be your position coach at Florida State in 2025.
No, and we know that, like, for the conversation of Ron Dugan specifically, like, he's still recruiting wide receiver targets for you, right? And so, we have that confirmed. So I think more so where the calendar, to me, or at least a caveat here of where it becomes interesting, is like, so you have the early signing period, but then with that transfer portal opening up a week after, like, if you make a hire that a player doesn't like or endorse, and I'm saying like a recruit, they can go ahead and bounce right away. Or if it's taking you make a change and there's not a hire actually being made and it's taking too long and you're like first option, second option falling short, like that's a dynamic to consider. All this being said, like, Mike Norvell can be back channeling this. I'm sure that he probably is, if he has certain position groups that he wants to go ahead and address in the offseason. So that can all be done. All this being said, guys, I think the next window that makes sense if you're going to see a coach firing would be after Notre Dame. There's a bye week before Charleston Southern, correct? Or is it Charleston Southern before?
The weekend of November 16th.
So that would be the next one, because then you only have 2 games left. One's against an FCS opponent, and then at that point, you're in the final week of the season against Florida. And that, we haven't talked. You lost to Miami. You're now 1-7. You're out of bowl eligibility, unless you somehow win every game and you become one of those 5-7 teams that makes it. But so that's the timeline there. Does that make sense? Of like what would be coming up next, and kind of what we're monitoring. Cool. All right. Next topic that Mike addressed that I want us to get into is basically play calling. He's prefaced by saying, we know that you've done both play calling directly and then, more of an overseeing of the offense, but not doing play calling in games. You've done both in your career. So his answer to that, whether it's something he would consider, changing that role. He said, for us, and for me more specifically, it's what's best for this football team. I'll always evaluate each role. Everybody's role that we have and what needs to be hasn't been very good offensively this year. It basically says then throughout his career, he's had different types of times where he's been a play caller and says, quote unquote, they've historically been really good. You look at it, you try to see, well, what are the issues? Why are there issues? Goes on to say, I'm not so stuck on doing just a thing in a certain way. I'll always evaluate that, just like as it comes into this week. When you get to the end of the season, I'm going to reevaluate all aspects of it and say, what is best for this team moving forward to go win the next game. That will always be something I evaluate. I've done it as a play caller. I've done it as not, kind of different scopes. That's not something for me that I just sit there and say, it's not an ego thing to say. Okay, so he says not ego. We know that he's had roles as the primary play caller. We know he's done split stuff before. We know he's done very little at different stops in his career. He has been the primary play caller at FSU the last 2 seasons. 3 seasons. Yes, 2022, 2023, and 2024, since Kenny Dillingham left. Because Kenny they were split, I think, when Kenny was here. So, Chris, thoughts on that answer and kind of how do you decode that one?
I thought that was pretty straightforward. Plus, we have the examples throughout his career of him doing it, him not doing it, him doing a little bit of it in the middle. So to me, it was kind of straightforward. I think the main thing there is, and we'll probably get into this a little bit later in the discussion, is the dynamics of making a change there. Currently, obviously, Alex Atkins, FSU's offensive line coach, also has the title of offensive coordinator. To me, that is simply a title more so than an impact on a game day. I think Alex has input during the week, and obviously definitely with the run game in the past, he's definitely worked with that based on things I know. But how do you move the pieces around the table if you do ultimately go hire an OC? But I don't want to get too far ahead.
Zach?
Yeah, I mean, I think this all but confirms. No, I was going to say that the Brendan Marion.
That was going ahead.
Yeah, but I think it's good to see that, for him to tell the fan base that it's not a deal breaker for him, right? Like some of these head coaches are hell bent on being the play caller if they're one of those offensive minded guys, and it's good to know that it's not going to be, at least in principle, like a hiccup for him if he's truly trying to, better the program and he thinks that he can go find a play caller that can improve this offense and improve. I mean, at some point, like you got to look yourself in the mirror and be like, this isn't working. And I will say, like Dane and I were both covering the Miami game, and both of us in the moment, and Dane pointed this out first. Like we thought that was one of Norvell's better called games of the season. Just from the standpoint of like things were schemed open. FSU's offense is just not equipped to take advantage of any, real opportunity to score points. And that's obviously been clear through 8 games. I just think that it's good to hear your head coach realize or openly say that, like, it's not him having control of play calling is not an ego thing. Like we know behind the scenes, like he's been fine giving that up almost completely with some of the offensive coordinators he's had over the years, either at Memphis or at FSU. So interested to see what that dynamic looks like if he truly does try to bring someone in, and how that works with, the current role of Alex Atkins, like Chris mentioned.
I do think he would bring in someone who's like-minded. I don't think he'd be good at working offense with someone who's drastically different than he is. Plus, he obviously has a lot of examples throughout his career as both a position coach, coordinator, and before he was a head coach, and then as a head coach, where he's been effective calling offense. I think the best reason for him to move on from being the primary play caller is to be more CEO-like.
Yeah, I agree with that, Chris. Like, I know it's not good radio and we're all agreeing with each other, but like I don't think play calling in the pantheon of issues for Florida State is super high up there, right? Like
there have been times where it's been an issue this season, but
this season I don't think it's a major year-over-year issue. Last year, I know some people didn't love last year, but I understood the idea of last year with the 2 guys he had on the outside. But this year, there's been moments where it felt like he was swimming as a play caller. Now, some of that is what you expect to work doesn't work, and that puts you in that situation. But there's certainly been moments where I feel like Mike is so involved, Coach Norvell is so involved in trying to do this and that and that and this, that when he then has to go be the play caller, it's just not easy because he is trying to make up for so many other things. And
I think
that's why I think. Go ahead.
I think it's almost the opposite. Like, I think that he's so involved in the offensive game planning and the play calling every week that it takes him away from some of the responsibilities that maybe he should be taking a more active role in within the program as that, CEO.
When things aren't going well, especially like he is in a vacuum.
Yeah. But I know during the portal window, for instance, like that was a hiccup for Florida State, was the fact that he was preparing for he had a ton of meetings and game planning meetings in preparation for the Orange Bowl, because that's his job. That was his role heading into that game. And that was a hiccup for Florida State as they tried to move fast on some of these portal players. Like they had to kind of wait on Norvell and some of those important, crucial times. We know how the transfer portal moves. It's a quick moving process. And I think some of those responsibilities of running the offense have kind of come back to bite him and the program when it comes to, addressing other facets of the organization.
He's one man and he can only do so much at a given
Yeah.
time. So like to Zach's point,
more.
We know that Mike loves being first on the phone with a transfer. He's done it multiple times. They've landed multiple guys for that very reason. But Zach's comment there is, if he's already in a meeting when a kid appears in the portal, he's in that meeting. So like that, the next situation can't be addressed until the meeting is over, type of thing. So that's what Zach's saying. I just don't want people turning that into more than it is.
Yeah,
he's arguably your best recruiter on staff.
Yeah,
and so if it's important for him to be, especially right now, like, and that might be some of the changes that take place where he realizes he needs more aggressive, dogged recruiters on the trail. But right now, like you being shorthanded and not being able to move punctually and quickly at all times, is a disadvantage because of how forward-facing he's been in his career and so good at connecting with people in a quick manner. One distinction, Chris touched on this, but like I do think this is important as we talk about like if there's changes to the offensive dynamic, and there almost will assuredly be. You can't be as poor as you were this year and keep it the same, right? Whether it's hiring a new offensive coordinator, whether it's Mike's relinquishing some of his roles, like as the OC, whatever it is, I do wonder what the dynamic is of it being his offense. And by that, I mean, like, he doesn't have to necessarily be the play caller. He's shown that throughout his career. That is correct. Like, it's not an ego thing for him. But he's also mentioning in his answer that the offense has generally been pretty good under him. And I think he has a way that he wants to do it and wants to look. And it's not to say it's not going to be malleable throughout the course of a season, because we've always seen there be changes and how they go ahead and attack different defenses based on the personnel they have. But like we've talked about Brennan Marion, like, is he going to go ahead and do a triple option offense? That I as much as I'd love to see like how something like that would look at a school like Florida State, I don't know that that's something that he has an appetite for. So I think that's an important distinction. Is like it will probably still be his offense in how he wants to go ahead and approach it. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I always think his fingerprints will be on it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And although I will say this, like, we expect this portal window for Florida State to be tumultuous, right? Like we think there's going to be a lot of coming and going. I think it's going to be a new look roster next season, right? So a lot of these guys are going to be learning FSU's offense, whatever that looks like, for the first time. And even like some of the freshmen that you retain, like a lot of those guys are in their first year of learning this, the Norvell offense. So if there's a time to make a change in philosophy, like I think it would be now, because it's not like, after the 2022 season, you're running it back with all these guys that are so used to your scheme that you've had for multiple years. You're just adding some experienced transfers on top of it. I mean, this is going to be what we expect to be a complete roster overhaul. It needs to be if they're going to, win any games next year. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not advocating for him to completely shift philosophy offensively. Like I think the Brennan Marion hype is fun because he has been successful in his career, his short career as an offensive coordinator. And what that would look like at Florida State, like Brendan said, would be fun to watch. But, I think if we're talking in reality, like I think he's probably going to if he does make a change, like it'll be someone that is more aligned with what he has done historically on offense.
Okay. Two more of the what do it mean segment here. Question about basically how his messaging to recruits has changed as the season's progressed. Chris asked him something similar, about a month ago?
I asked it going into the bye week as they were getting ready to hit the road.
Okay. And so, 3 weeks later, 2 more data sets of subpar performances. And, I think it was important to kind of readdress and see what the pitch is going to be. And this is coming on the wake of losing CJ Wiley, him decommitting. He hung around. I give him credit. Like, he hung around for a pretty long time and gave it a chance. I don't fault a player for going and saying that this probably isn't for them right now, to be honest. So that puts you at 0 wide receiver recruits currently at this point. That's coming off of a 2022 cycle in which he didn't have any either. Anyways, Mike's answer to how is his recruiting pitch? What is it? How's it changed since the start of the year? He says, you go into the season, it's been a bad year record-wise, performance-wise at times. Just looking at what we've gone through, it still goes back to every time. You look at the record, you could see that as something that could potentially push away some players, and then some guys see the opportunity to come in and be different, to be a difference and be a difference maker in what they're doing and what we're going and where we're going. That's still about finding the right guys. That's where we found. You look 3 years ago, we found ourselves where our record sucked, but we had to find guys that wanted to come in and be difference maker here at Florida State to help get our program back to going to doing something great. The guys that were here that had talent just needed to grow and to be able to go out there and play at a high level, and they had to do that too. They said they made their mark. So he's basically said, I've seen the story play out. This year it's been extremely disappointing that we have not played better when we've had opportunities. We've had our times to be much better than what we've shown. But the right guys are going to show up, and the right guys are going to be a part of getting this program back to where it deserves to be and where we expect it to be. Those are the ones I'm looking for. The right ones will say yes, and then we'll come in here and work our butt off. It's going to be a great story to see. Zach, recruiting guru, what stands out to you about that answer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tough question to answer in the midst of a season like this. So, like, I think he did a pretty good job taking takeaways from it. Like, I mean, they're kind of like, I don't think FSU has much leverage on the recruiting trail right now. So,
any.
Yeah, like, I think, when it comes to, finding the right guys, or, what he's referenced to, like, I think it's, finding guys that are willing to, say yes right now to a program that seems like it's in shambles. And like, they're pretty, historically, like, Norvell and his staff have been pretty solid at finding, quality character guys. Like, that hasn't been an issue for them throughout when talking about the guys they've actually recruited and brought into this program. I know we've seen some of that this year, but I think a lot of that has to do with losing and when the product looks this bad. But even considering, like, the way they've recruited this roster, like, it doesn't even come close to, like, some of the character issues we saw from, like, a Willie Taggart roster or even a Jimbo Fisher roster. Like, yes, there are guys that on the team that are not, playing well, and also, off the field are issues. But I think moving forward, like, yeah, I mean, you have to find, you can't just sign, whoever, right? Like, you can't just, take a bunch of scrubs and add them to this 2025 class and be like, that's who we're bringing in to turn things around. So, but also, like, you can't be super picky. And I think FSU still has some issues with that on the recruiting trail, considering the situation they're in. You're 1-7. Like, you don't, like Chris said, like, there's really no leverage you have. So, like, if there's a 3-star receiver that you feel is solid, like you need to go all out for him. It can't be like like if that guy can play at Florida State, like you need to go at him. And that's the question that you asked with the recruits moving forward. So, I don't usually take away a ton from what Mike Norvell says about recruiting in press conferences, just because, what he says is the message in a press conference isn't always, exactly what the message is going to be when he's not speaking, publicly. And it's different for every recruit. But yeah, I mean, moving forward, it's going to be tough for them on the recruiting trail. So, I guess it's good for him to mention like how the record is impacting, recruits and how they've had a flurry of decommitments over the last few months. But yeah, I mean, as far as, what they're looking for moving forward, I don't take away a ton from what he says in a press conference setting.
I thought this answer was better than the previous answer, but I also think that's Mike Norvell is an optimist. I'm a pessimist kind of person. I think when I asked a question a few weeks ago, my expectation was that at best FSU was going to go 1-1 in the next 2 games. I don't think Mike Norvell thinks the same way. Obviously, they went 0-2, and now here you sit. I think about recruiting probably 8 days a week. It's one of those things because it's how I cut my teeth in this business, and it's what I've done for a long time, and I've seen the benefits of it for a program and the negatives for a program with it. I think FSU's opportunity to pivot in this recruiting class from a high school perspective has come and gone. I don't think they're the ultra aggressive spending type in that group, in the high school group, where they're going to have really any ability over the next 5 weeks to really swing things in a dramatic manner with what they're going to bring in high school. And for me, it's ultra disappointing thinking back to what they were trying to execute back when like May and June rolled around, especially with the official visits of the summer. They had a very high blue chip ratio class. They had a very good class in the sense of the guys that they had committed to them. They brought on to campus a ton of very highly talented guys, and they should have hit at a higher rate before any games were played, and they didn't. And that was a disappointing thing and a bit of a red flag. Now, I don't really expect that. For me, down the stretch, it's go get guys, and Zach said this, that can play at FSU. Don't just take a guy to take a guy. Don't fill a number in the high school ranks simply to fill a number. But I do think there are positions, specifically offensive tackle body types, defensive tackle body types, where if you think a guy has a shot and you think as a coach that you can project the possibility of they develop into something that's a high-level player that can play at this level and be good for us 2-3 years down the road, and they're good enough to come in the program and survive that first year as they're learning the ropes, I think that's where you invest some of this time and effort right now. Because I think it would be great for FSU to bulk up certain spots with those kind of bodies, those kind of people, and then go to portal and get guys that can help you next year, because you got to get better next year. And you're not going to get a whole lot of those out of high school ranks going forward.
The only thing I'll add to what you guys said, and I agree with it, at least for everything I was here for as I was refilling my coffee, I do think we get a little glimmer of glimpse of what his pitch is going to be moving forward in that answer. Talk about opportunity, playing time is going to be one, and he does reference where they were a few years ago. I think that's going to be something that they're going to be, trying to. Obviously, they're going to have to address what's happened this season, but you're going to be pointing back to like what you've done, in the past, and players in the NFL, and he mentioned those in his answers. So we still kind of have an idea.
Jared Verse. He picked a 5-7 team, and then obviously they went on to win 23 games.
So that's going to be what they're going to aim to do. That's what they're going to try. Those are the courts are going to try to hit there. Last one, he was asked, and this is a wordy answer, but so he was asked about like what your focus is for this week going against North Carolina versus, what are you trying to focus on for when December comes and it's open season on your roster, on other rosters, it's free agency, it's signing day, everything. And he answered it well. The part of it that I thought was interesting, so he talks about it being a balance. He says, come December, we have a plan. During the bye week, we spend a good portion of time with personnel, our evaluation of where we are, what are the things that we need to do, what are the positions of need. What does that look like for us to be able to take a big step to where what's necessary? You mentioned turnover within the roster. I'm really excited about a lot of our young players that we have. I'm excited about the development I've seen from them throughout the course of the year. And I also know that we have positions where we have a need. We need to go and get elite level players to that position to come in here and complement what we have here on the roster currently. So we've spent a lot of time with it already throughout the course of the year, but there's definitely a twofold thought. For us, we have to do everything in our power for this week. So it still always comes back to this week. That is consistent with Mike and all of these answers pretty much. So one point to me, guys, that really stands out there, and we've seen him answer this in other ways too, like the retention of freshmen who you've played a good deal this season is going to be super important for them in their plan. And I think maybe like in the next couple of weeks, we can do an episode where we set the parameters for like what we think a successful offseason would look like things that need to happen for you to feel like, okay, you have a chance to get this going back in the right direction. Well, there's really only one direction you can go, but you understand my point. I think their retention of guys like Amari Williams, of Landon Thomas, of some of the freshman wide receivers who have played, Luane McCoy specifically, Luke Cromanhoek, like any of the true freshmen who've played, or guys like Kai Bates, he's mentioned before recently, Charles Lester, Ricky Knight, like guys who haven't played but they think really highly of, that's going to be huge, right? Because it's going to be open season for those players. Like I'm pretty sure they've already been getting tampered with, and that's how college football works. I'm not scolding anyone for that. So that's part of it. Anything else in that answer that you guys would like to focus on or talk about real quick?
I think it's about identifying your weaknesses and being very brutally honest about those weaknesses and the players you have that may satisfy those weaknesses or are incapable of satisfying those weaknesses. You got to go get a true left tackle. Like it's absurd that a program like Florida State hasn't had a true left tackle in years. Just shouldn't be the way. I don't know that Lucas Simmons is necessarily the guy. I think you stay invested in Lucas Simmons and you want to keep him in the program. But I think you got to find something in between to satisfy that position.
You can't bank on him being the dude next
year.
Right.
He's a year behind. This was basically year one for him. The body still has to change. The strength has to change. He has to come along. I don't know. You don't go into next season banking on him, I guess.
To that point, Chris, you mentioned left tackle. When he says elite players in that answer, my ears perk up a little bit to where like money. Like they know
tackles, left tackles, number one receiver. Make sure your quarterback position is sound and good, and that might already be on the roster, but you got to know it. You can't screw that position up 2 years in a row because he screwed it up this year. Those are the things that you got to do. If you have top-level, elite, high-level players, they're erasers. They make things go away. Quarterback's certainly one of those, especially if they're a scrambler and capable of that. They can make up for an O-line. But a top-tier offensive line also makes you better because you're a better running team because of it. You're a better passing team because of it. A top receiver, and I don't want anybody having PTSD, but the Travis Hunters of the world, who are elite number one receivers, they make every other receiver, every other pass catcher, every other piece of that offense better because they demand so much attention. Malik Benson doesn't demand attention. And God knows I liked Malik Benson. And I love saying betting on Benson. What a bet busted. You can't have bets that bust this offseason. You got to get guys that work that make you a better football team.
Anything you want to add to that, Zach?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about like an elite left tackle, like I don't believe those exist really in the portal. That I'm sure there's exceptions.
One did last year, man, and he was on campus.
Carter Smith.
Carter Smith has an 80 PFF grade for one of the top teams in the country. Like,
I'm just glad they offered him a good NIL deal. No, I think with like the left tackles, like to me that's a high school recruiting thing, man. Like, and that's
I agree with you.
A lot of these positions, and it's something that I was trying to alert people about. Like, this is an issue when you're coming off a 13-win season and you don't sign a single blue chip. Like your interior line D-line class after a 13-win season was 2 3-star prospects. Like, that is an issue. That was a huge red flag. And like, this is where it comes back to bite you, because we saw what the D tackle market looked like in the portal last offseason. It was robust. Like, there were only a few players, and those guys all made north of $500,000 in the portal. Like, and some of those guys closer to $1 million. So like, that is going to be a market that is, first of all, going to be tough for Florida State to compete in, considering the situation they're in. So I think a lot of that's going to, like, I don't think that FSU is going to be in it for the guys that you consider the top end portal entries. I think a lot of the wheelhouse
point. FSU identifies those guys. Think about it. We talked about Carter Smith on the D-tackle conversation. You can point out Simeon Barrow. They loved both of those guys. It's just price tag. They weren't willing to compete. Carter Smith went back to where he came from. There's a degree of that element too.
Yeah.
But like if you fix left tackle, it takes the bodies you have there and it slides them to other spots. It makes you better at the other spots. And it also gives you truly what you need there. I think FSU has to value those top 5 positions more than ever before because it will help them be better at other positions.
Yeah.
Because you're not making up for it. You're not trying to have 2-3 good receivers instead of having that dude who is a dude who makes the other guys better. I think they got to get better at that.
I completely agree with you. I just think that, like, what kind of leverage do we think Florida State's going to have in the portal? Like,
They don't. They're going to have to overpay.
Yeah, either overpay or you're going to be in the wheelhouse of like finding, hidden gems, right?
And
Like, kind
I
of
know
what
it's not
FSU
my
did.
money, but overpaying's worth it because if you win football games, money comes with it. And if you lose football games, money goes away.
Yeah, but FSU
to me, that's the math. It's like, do I buy 40-inch TV or a 62-inch TV? Well, it's like 10 more bucks a month for 2 years. I'm buying the bigger one because I want the bigger one. Like the investment makes sense because long term it pays off for you. I think FSU got a little cheap, for lack of a better term, last year, or tried to play it financially sound or things like that, and it didn't work.
I mean, they have like a top 10 salaried roster. They just didn't push all their chips into middle to have a top 5. And there's a big difference as far as we understand it between like the top like 3 or 4 teams in budget and where FSU is in that 10 to 15.
But they also know what the best players in the portal looked like last year. They were involved with many of them.
What's
They
the
even had a
percentage
bunch of them
difference?
on campus.
I agree.
It
Chris,
just when it
we get
came
that.
time to close on them, they didn't do what they had to do to close on them.
We get that. What's the percentage difference between 20 and 13?
20 and 13. I mean, so brain's not working well enough.
Come on, calculator. Let's go.
All right. I know. Usually I'm good at this. I mean, 36%, I think, but
I mean, so that's significant. You're talking about third more of like that's what the highest NIL salaried roster is in the country, to where you're at this year. Like that is significant. I think the dynamic that is going to bridge the gap to what you guys are talking to is like, okay, you can overpay for players or just pay more. Maybe not saying overpay because the market at a certain point. Like if you want to get in on Simeon Barrow, you're going to have to pay him double probably what your other defensive tackles were getting or close to it, which is going to create its own dynamic in the room. But in hindsight, maybe it's something you would.
But you took Tommy While, you took Grady Kelly. Who else did they take in that room?
That's it. I mean, that's all they took at defensive tackle.
Tommy While literally never plays for you. Grady Kelly is a serviceable reserve who is a serviceable reserve, and that's all he is. Not to send a stray bullet in his direction.
Grady Kelly's been fine for what you've added.
But Simeon Barrow's an impact player.
Yeah.
The bigger issue.
By the way, the whole Miami doing this narrative, whatever. Starting quarterback transfer, best running back transfer, number 3 wide receiver transfer, starting center transfer, leader in sacks transfer, number 2 in sacks transfer, leader in tackles transfer. Like, if you hit on your transfers, you're going to be good. If you miss on your transfers, you're going to suck. Like, that's
FSU's the living embodiment of that, a year-over-year situation.
Yeah, but I think that speaks to the point that I want to bring up. Like, the reason why Florida State was in the position they were with the D-line last year was because, their starting D-line coming back, that group of Jackson, Farmer, Peyton, like, they had all the leverage because Florida State didn't recruit well enough past them to be able to be like, hey, like, we're not going to pay you guys this crazy amount. And I think what they paid was overall pretty fair.
Probably was a good value compared to what comparable players made.
Yeah, and I think so. But like also
for FSU,
you put yourself in a position where you're completely without leverage. And I keep bringing this word up because it is important in these portal windows. When you don't recruit the high school level well enough. And I think that's what the bigger point here is like, and obviously I want to preface this. Like, I don't think that we're talking about in the lens of this offseason, right? So like the high school stuff is that, the high school stuff that impacts this offseason, that's already, you can't do anything about that. Right. But that is the reason why we saw them have issues at certain positions and issues with, being able to pay for some of the top players in the portal was because a lot of your guys on your roster that you expected to be starters demanded a lot of money. And they knew that, FSU needed them on the roster because, first of all, at certain positions, there weren't quality players in the portal. Linebacker, I think, was one of them. And then second of all, like behind those guys, like you can look at the room and be like, none of these guys are ready to start behind me. I deserve more money. And we saw that all over the roster. DJ Lundy, like there were a lot of players that FSU was, somewhat desperate to keep. And we've seen this year, a lot of those players were not worth the money that you spent on them.
Yeah. And one other idea of, and I agree with that. One other idea of money that I want to address real quick before we move on. Just because you're the highest bidder doesn't mean you're going to get people based on the season you're having.
I want to, like, that is important to bring up in the lens of this portal window, because, I think it was easier to think that, like, if Florida State overspent, especially coming off the season they did a year ago, like, you would be in a position to land pretty much anyone you wanted. But coupled with, obviously what we expect staff changes after the season, but with the current iteration of this coaching staff, like I don't think that you're, getting yourself ahead when it comes to relationship building, especially in the high school ranks, but also, in the portal. And I know that's a condensed window, and that's, we've seen them succeed. But I just, I think Brennan's point's important here, because I don't know that if just because you throw out a number that's higher than some of these, playoff contenders, like I don't think that's, you just automatically land them because of that.
Okay. Let's get into some listener questions. There's a lot of good ones. Chris only has about 10 minutes or so. Chris, when we hit 8:40 and you got to go, all right, and we'll just finish it off. Cool?
Yep, we're good.
All right, cool. I don't want you having your kids run late because of the podcast going late. Let's see. This is from, I'm trying to think of exactly where I want to start. So much for this being rapid fire. All right, let's start with an atheist otter. Interesting name. Do you think the show cause order for Alex Atkins has or will impact Norvell's decision on whether to move on from him? I would think it would be difficult to fire Atkins when he really can't get a job in college football.
If this was Buy or Snow brought to you by the Turner Group, I would be buying that.
I would too.
Yeah.
Atkins' show causes what, 2 years?
I don't remember offhand. I don't want to misstate.
I think it's 2 more years.
2 more years, and okay, so that's a little while. Yeah,
3 years total.
Yeah, and Norvell has a reputation as a coach's coach. I don't know if you would kind of throw someone out in the cold like that, but
I do think you stripped the OC title from him personally. I again, messaging.
Yeah, I do too.
But the finances probably don't change even with that happening. Obviously, I don't expect them to change.
No, he ended up, I was looking through the coaching contracts yesterday, and I think he ended up not getting a raise this past one through, and I think that's probably the NCAA violation. Probably not prohibited, but it's tough to get a raise when you're when you get that. I will say this, like, one thing on Alex Atkins, like, I do think is important is we're talking about value and the value that you bring, and obviously what the offensive line has done this year has not been good, to put it lightly. It is the only one of the only position groups that has been recruited at a fairly high level right now. And I'm not sure, like, if you have to get Solomon Thomas to keep Alex Atkins. I don't know if those two were tied to each other that much, but like, he is buying himself some goodwill to say, oh, we're going to have a really, like Mario Nash is a good looking prospect, and Solomon Thomas is obviously a blue chip prospect, and he's recruiting it this year. I think he's caring about high school recruiting at a level that he hasn't in the last few cycles. That's valuable if you're trying to look as a coach and say, like, okay, if you're looking at as a head coach and trying to say, who am I retaining here? Who's helping us build this roster back to where it needs to be? If you have someone who's built relationships with players and you've been able to go ahead and secure some good commitments, that's not something I dismiss. Let's see. Questions is from Dubernol. Is it true Keon Coleman, easy for me to see, was telling, easy for me to say, oh boy. Is it true Keon Coleman was telling recruits, don't come play for Dugans? Zach?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that was something that Florida State was trying to combat back in like January, February with some high-profile receivers they were after. But yes, that happened.
Okay. I mean, I think that's people might be mad at Keon Coleman for that. I think that at this point, based on the body of evidence that's kind of out this year, is unfortunately more of an indictment on your wide receiver development and coaching. Frankly, that's something that you had to combat back in January, and you're at a point again where you're about to have to start combating drop rate and development of someone like a Hakeem Williams who hasn't really shown a lot of progress this season as a 5-star recruit. Like that's something you have to address. That's a real thing for being genuine here. JJH10 buy or Snone, sponsored by
The Turner Group.
Norvell has to win 8 to 9 games next year or he's on the hot seat. I think that's a hard buy, right?
Yeah, I think that's a buy. I don't think firing is quite ready to enter the conversation at those numbers, but yeah, hot seat, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Kellum Koff 2013 buy or Snone, sponsored by
The Turner Group.
This season has a negative impact on the interest from one of the Big 2 conferences. I thought I said Big 12 at first.
So knowing that, I think those decisions are made in a much broader view of things, and ultimately TV ratings, which FSU is still getting despite the miserable freaking product they are this year, are still there.
I do wonder how it impacts your leverage in the sense of
they've definitely clamped down and they're not near
you've
as
lost money or you're
as
going to lose money, right? If you're Florida State, based on just attendance and booster donations and IL, whatever, like you're losing means you lose money.
To go micro on that conversation of the question, I do think the one thing it probably influences leverage on is full share versus partial share.
Okay. All right. No, I get that. That's a Washington, Oregon reference point there. Chevy Toys, please answer some coaches who stay and go questions. Give the customers what they want. The hell with access. I mean, Chris fired someone last week, man. Like,
hypothetically, I have fired Ron Dugans multiple times. Yes. No, I still think the number is going to be lower than some people really want. I am interested in how many decide to depart without getting basically pink slipped. I think that's something that doesn't get much attention. Does someone decide something better is out there for them or something different is out there for them than what they're doing here?
So a name that comes to mind when I think that is like Pat Surtain.
Right.
His name's already been floated out for the Southern Miss head coaching job.
Yeah, obviously could go back to the league, has a great deal of rapport there, has worked there before. So yes.
Okay. Can you imagine? I don't think this is a scenario that happens, but the listeners and the readership reaction if you go through this offseason and the only defensive coaching change is Pat Surtain leaving.
You could start writing the Norvell the new hot board for the head coaching job. I mean, that would be insane. No, I mean, to address Chris's thing about I think that is a fair. And Surtain's provided a lot of value since he was hired 2 years ago, and that's one of the only coaches to really, I think, provide a ton of value. But as far as other coaches, do we really think that they're going to have a robust market for after how this how this is unfolded, for what their next job opportunities? I think this is probably what they're being paid now and the current role they're in. A lot of these, for a majority of these guys, it's probably the best role they're going to have, at least for a while. So yeah, I mean, and they've got some older gentlemen on staff as well. So I think, if you're talking
respectful, Chris,
if you're talking about reality, could we see some retirements that? That's definitely another avenue for how
the Odell retirement's been rumored for, I feel like, going.
Oh, and I'm not even
now, but
just
that's one. Yeah. Chris Thompson's maybe someone you're talking about in that conversation. I think somebody like Chris Thompson would have a job market because, well, he's one of the older. I think
the time when Chris decides to name names.
No, I'm not. I like CT. I'm not firing CT. I also think CT is a guy that Mike Norvell has a great deal of confidence in. I've
Yes.
mentioned that numerous times where I think he's very important, Mike Norvell. My point more so with bringing up CT is I think he is a guy that has so many coaching relationships and has done it for a long time and done a lot of different things and worked at a lot of different areas of the country where I think there would be a job market for a guy like that. I think there's always schools looking for experienced guys who they have relationships with, are confident in, things like that. So I do think a guy like that would have opportunities if he were to look around and maybe try to do something different or just reset the clock. I wasn't going into that conversation to retire Chris Thompson or fire Chris Thompson.
Understood. We're just having fun here. Trying to entertain people during these trying times. TB3 golf. Has your seasonal depression kicked in yet? I don't have seasonal. Mine's more in the summer. I do get tired during the season. October is usually when I threaten to quit. I made it through October without threatening to quit. We're good.
October was hell of a long month for me, so I'm just glad it's come and gone. Now the season, like the aggravation of how bad they are, it stinks. It's not fun to cover. Product on Saturday gives you no reward for work throughout the week. But it is what it is. We'll get through it. We'll cover it. I'm very interested in December for a variety of reasons. See what comes from that. And my hope is it doesn't linger and become a long-term issue for the program, that they do something to rectify it in the coming months. And that, that is what I look forward to hopefully covering. I'm trying to be optimistic. I'm trying to be more like Coach Norvell, being less like Chris, where he's pessimistic.
Chris said doo-doo. Garrett Knoll said, if you had to describe this FSU team in terms of beer brands, what are you comparing it to? Zima for me.
Is it Steel City Reserve? That's like the 32-ounce can for 99 cents, and it's like just pure death in a can. Is that even still made? I'm hearkening back to my college days. I don't know.
I mean, I think you might be like besmirching a certain brand if you're saying the wrong one.
It's not Iron City, baby. I love me some Iron City.
That's what I was thinking. It's the Pittsburgh one. What is it, Zach?
Warm Bush Light.
Newton Knoll, how will your pitch attract quote unquote elite portal talent at the end of the season when they can't keep recruits now? I mean, I think the pitch towards transfers is a little different towards the pitch to freshmen or high school seniors, but I think it's a fair question. We've addressed it to an extent here. Is that
I think at certain spots and I know they don't like doing this, but it is straight up. One, you're going to get paid, and two, you're going to start.
Yeah, but I think when you're talking about elite portal prospects, they're going to start anywhere they go.
Yeah, that's probably true.
So I think to me, the one thing you have going for you in the portal is your previous success with guys in the portal. That's the one thing that you can point to be like, hey, there is a proof of concept here. I don't think you can really use the playing time pitch for elite players in the portal. Maybe some of the guys that are considering, other top schools that they would, have to compete for a job at. Whereas, at FSU that, and I think that's kind of a tier below those elite players. Where, I think at FSU, like they'd probably be starters. Whereas, if other schools are considering adding some depth at a position and that's the player that they're after, like those might be some of the battles you can win based on pitching off of previous success with other portal guys.
Okay, this is from Scranton Knoll, buy or Sonone, sponsored by
the Turner Group.
FSU overpays for a high-level 25 recruit, helping the class look better, similar to Colorado taking Seton last year. That's a buy for me. I think you will.
Who?
Yeah, my bigger question, like, I would they like to, or would they be willing to? Yes, buy. Are they going to be in position to actually do that with somebody? I'm not sure.
I guess the overpay is going to have to be pretty. Okay, I shouldn't say overpay.
To me, that would almost be a retention thing, like keeping a CJ Wiley, for example, or keeping Kevin Wynn, who I still think there's a great deal of a chance that he departs the class.
Solomon, you don't think there's a position?
Probably a guy like that too.
Okay, so that, I mean, yeah.
But I don't know that they can go and pull somebody that hasn't previously been in their class, who I would dignify with that. They'll get a good player or two, I think, down the stretch.
What about like a TJ Alford or Tavian Wallace, like a position where you have to go get?
Yeah. So just talking specifically about TJ Alford, like FSU is very much financially invested in that recruitment, and I don't think they're going to win that recruitment.
Yeah, I feel like that's one because they've been involved for so long with each other and publicly
Like there was a point where they felt good about TJ Alford this season, but like
surrounding his official visit for the
yeah,
Memphis game. I presume.
but eh, you know he's committed to Ohio State and his other option is Miami, and he just went and watched that game in Miami. So like
That,
you
that,
This
that
is
comes down-
Jeremiah Smith coming back for Zach, where it's a leverage game. It's a kid playing a leverage game to maximize the opportunity he's going to get.
Yeah, but if
he's going to stick with the opportunity he originally wanted and had.
I think if you found a way, and I think we've talked about it before, but like and Jack and I've disagreed on it, but like if there was trust that I think that was broken from Jeremiah Smith's camp. But if you did something that was like 30% over the market rate for him, you probably would have gotten his attention again. That's my theory. And I think like if you said that with like, now does that work though? Does that work with TJ Alford or Tavion Wallace or whoever?
I think
like,
you got to pick your punch and you got to land it. It's got to be a kid that like a coaching change at the school he's committed to happens, opens the door. You immediately get in there, you make the pitch. The financials are good. He says yes, you get it. But like it's got to be so perfectly executed. I don't think it's just we're throwing money at these 10 kids who are all high level recruits. We got a shot. Like no, I think it's more a perfect scenario plays out for them. I think I would Sonone it overall.
Okay. And you're Sonone, Zach?
Yeah, like I think they would want to. I just don't see right now, based on like the guys they have expected coming in over the next month, like who it would be. I mean, can we Chance Linton maybe? He's now a top 50 or Chase Linton, sorry, a top 50 player. According to 24/7 Sports, 6'4", 215-pound edge who's been trending to Georgia for the last couple of months. Like, is that like that might be like, sure, go ahead. Like that would be a welcomed addition to a class that doesn't have a defensive end commit. Like I think that's probably, something that FSU needs to do. But like to your point earlier, Brendan, like just because you offer the most amount of money doesn't mean you guarantee that you're going to land someone.
It's like how much more at this
point.
point.
And like regarding Linton in particular, which is crazy to me, what I'm about to bring up is I've heard the staff is split on him. Like they're not all sold on him. And I'm
going to go ahead and pitch. I talked to him last night. The story's coming to the site today. Stay tuned.
Knowles247.com. We're almost in promo season, boys.
Chris is doing more recruiting than the staff, man. No, I'm kidding.
No, I'm not.
No, I think like with Linton, like that's probably a guy you need to go pay a bunch of money and land over Georgia, who's going to land like I think 20 defensive linemen this class.
Yeah, Georgia is very much in the business of just taking all the D linemen. That's what they do, and that's because a few years ago they got burned there, and they were like never again under Kirby. Kirby's not going to put up with that. They also over recruit high school versus a portal.
So. We are talking about like this was stuff that FSU wasn't going to do a year or two ago, and that's a change. And I don't know if I feel like
market dynamics changed, buddy.
It just
we're living in the Wild West till the house settlement comes down, and then the Wild West just has to be sheriff in town.
I understand that, and I get it. As part of me, when your ethos changes like to an extent, that's not a good thing, but that's also what the market's dictating. So it is what I guess I can't be super critical of it right now. I could be skeptical of it though.
You can put a Band-Aid on a cut, but what do you put on a gash?
Stitches. That was rhetorical. I smoke weed, buy or Sonone. The quarter sponsored by. I don't smoke weed for what it's worth. That's the name of the user. The quarterback that is going to probably help my anxiety. The quarterback is going to help turn the program around and save Mike's job is currently on the roster. So we are assuming that Mike's job gets turned around and saved. I do think. All right, phrase it this way. If it gets turned around, I think it has to be one of the guys on the roster.
I'll buy that.
Bye. Is that like Luke Kromenhoek like gets to his potential or close to it by next year? I think that's kind of what we're looking at. All right, almost done here. Hulk Nolgan, that's good. Buyer Sonone, sponsored by
the Turner Group.
Some staff members have stopped giving any effort in recruiting because they know they will not be retained. I think that's a Sonone, right?
Sonone, as far as I know, I haven't heard any of that. This isn't where I'm calling Charles Strong, and he's like, "Yeah, I haven't heard from them in a month." That's an old Jimbo reference.
That was a Jimbo reference. Yeah.
I have not heard of any like people not I mean, I think there are staff members that are worried for their jobs, but they also
Wholeheartedly.
understand this is a job and they have to do it until it's not a job anymore for them.
That's how coaches operate. Like that's to the end of time. Like that's how college coaches operate. It's a pretty well known thing.
Tommy Tuberville's at dinner, takes a new job, doesn't show back up at the dinner. I mean, this is what they do.
Yeah, that's a little different. Someone asked about offensive coordinators other than like your candidates. I mentioned Cade Bell, who we talked about last week. I don't know. Do you guys have anyone other than like Brendan Marion or Cade Bell of like you'd be like, ooh, that'd be a shakeup that'd be noteworthy?
I haven't shifted my thought process to hut board season quite yet.
I think that'll be this month for us.
I always do kind of like keep up with like what player or school has produced at this position year over year, and it's the same guy they're coaching, and is it different players? Like I'll do stuff like that, and then kind of investigate guys, and then dig further on them, just because I don't know. That's what I do. But yeah, I haven't really like gotten into hot board season idea. I guess I am probably going to transition there with the bye week coming up.
Yeah, we'll do more on that. I think as we kind of that like we'll do more on that as things become clearer. I'll put it that way. All right, last question I have for you guys. This is mine. Like, what aspect of the season has most shaken your faith in Mike Norvell, other than the record? Like, what has made you wonder the most if he can get it turned around?
Do you want me to go first, Zach?
I'll go. His stubbornness. I think the fact that it took so long for him to transition into a full-on youth movement that we're seeing now was the most troubling thing to me, because like I think it was pretty clear to everyone on the outside of this program and many on the inside of this program that you know there needed to be change all over this roster after how the team looked through the first 2 weeks. And I mean, it essentially took until the 6th or 7th game to really see a full, youth movement adopted by Norvell all over this roster, especially on offense. And I think, quarterback, like that's a position you look at, and, obviously, he says he was going to make the change to Brock Glenn in the SMU game, but that didn't happen until the injury of DJU. So like, I think stubbornness, and I think if you just look back at how he's run the program, since he arrived in Tallahassee in late 2019, like there are moments that you look back and like, I mentioned I think it was after the second game, like the thing that I kept coming back to about how it could possibly look this bad was the fact that they made no staff changes after the 2023 season. Like that was super surprising to me. And I thought that was stubborn by Norvell to not, realize that he had inefficiencies in his organization on the coaching staff, and thought he could definitely capitalize on those inefficiencies in replacing them with, the leverage of a big season. And yeah, I mean and then you move into this year and the things I mentioned with the on-field results. Like I think that was worrisome. And I hope that he's less stubborn when it comes to making changes this upcoming offseason.
For me, it's the offensive line. An offensive line being abysmal and awful is not something that's easily fixed overnight. And, even with the portal where you can, to some degree, Band-Aid it when it's this bad, I don't know. And the fact that, I know I keep harping on, but the fact that this program hasn't done an effective job of getting a left tackle is just, it pisses me off. To be just matter of fact, it really pisses me off. Like it's one of those things that you just shouldn't do in football. And I don't know. I think it's one of those things that as they try to dig out his hole, as they try to get better, as they try to turn the corner, that group's got to take such a massive leap. And it really, really shakes my confidence that they're going to be able to bounce back and do it. Because, you haven't effectively recruited a backup center. You haven't effectively recruited a left tackle. The obsession with guards playing tackle just has to end. There's too many things there that all have to change. And in my mind, that is something that essentially the mindset of the people that do it, which is Alex Atkins, Mike Norvell, everybody else associated with that position, it has to change. It has to dramatically change.
I'll go one step further on that, Chris. Not just the offensive line. I think this speaks to the offensive personnel in general. And Mike talked about this the other day, admitted some mea culpas there. Like, they thought the offensive line was going to be really good.
Yeah.
So that's what shakes my confidence more than just it being abysmal. Is you thought and you made almost every offensive decision based this offseason based on that. Based on you were going to be able to run the football effectively, and then you could build an offense around DJ Ongole and have a lot of speedy wide receivers. It made sense with the notion that your offensive line would be good. And it hasn't been. And like, to be fair, like, we thought it looked solid in camp. Like that, if the issues you were having on offense, it didn't seem like it was the offensive line. And it's just deteriorated and was not good, obviously. But I think to me, like, when you're spending the money that you spent on Mike Norvell, $10 million, like, that's buying you something beyond just like upside. Like, it's an unofficial insurance. Like, you have a floor, you have someone that you know what they're looking at, you have someone who's stabilized the program, and this is a year that was supposed to be like, hey, this is sustainable. You moving forward now can be a big dog, and the fact that they misevaluated so drastically of what they had, especially on offense, it shakes me. Like, I don't know how to interpret what they say moving forward and what they see, because it was so far off, and I'm sure that's stuff that bothers them tremendously. It should, but yeah, that to me is significant. So yeah, real quick, one last thing I know you got to run, Chris. Buy or Sonone, sponsored by
The Turner Group.
FSU's snub impacted the way they went about building this roster. We've heard a lot about this from different narratives. I have different thoughts on it. I want to get your guys' take on it.
I'm probably wrong, but I'm Sononing it. I've struggled to believe the snub is what's to blame for all of the issues of this year. Do I think it impacted them wholeheartedly? Do I think it's why this year has gone so down the drain so poorly? No. I do think that it shook the group. We heard so much about bigger, stronger, faster. We didn't hear anything about tougher. And FSU's got to be a tougher football program. They got to be tougher in the trenches. They got to be tougher with how they play. They got to be tougher mentally. Response is a big thing that's been preached around these parts for a long time, and this year's team is incapable of it. They've got to get back to being tougher in every which way. If the snub is what took away that toughness, then sure, maybe that's it. But I don't know. I struggle with using the snub as sort of an out for anything that's happened around these parts since 2024 rolled in.
I don't think the argument is that the snub is why this season has been the way it is, but I do think it had a factor in how they constructed the roster. And, to what extent, I don't know. But I mean, when you go through a moment like that as a coaching staff, I think it, like Chris, like you said, it shook them to their core, because, I mean, if the core of the program was built on, response and overcoming adversity, and they did that a ton this past season, or, in 2023, and you don't get to reap the rewards of that. So I think that caused a sense of like, what does my message mean? By Mike Norvell. What did I build this program, around this message? Like, what, I think it kind of invalidated a lot, whether it was right or wrong. Like, it invalidated a lot of what he said and how that was translated to his players. So, and the second part of it is, like, I did think it probably created a sense of panic for Florida State and how they attacked that portal window and the finishing parts of the high school window. Like, it certainly didn't help their momentum. I'm sure they expected after a 13-win season to, be preparing for a college football playoff and using that to sell the recruits and portal players. And instead, they had to completely pivot, in the midst of seeing all their players opt out for the Orange Bowl. They also had to go and convince a bunch of players like, hey, this is, why you should sign up to play for us. And like, I think that's hard to do. There are a lot of emotions in that. So I buy that there is an impact in how they constructed the roster based on the snub. I don't think it has everything to do with why this season has sucked.
It's known that. So I buy the point that Chris made that there might be an emotional impact of this, and Zach, you made that point too. I wholeheartedly buy that. Was something I thought in real time was like, I don't mean like, oh, woe is me type emotional impact. I mean your coach's message rang hollow, and that's to no fault of his own. Just like everything that you preached and said, like Zach's point, I agree with totality there. I think it made your life more difficult in recruiting, but the part of like that people think that this team, that they would have just punted on this year and let it just be a full-blown transition year, a full-blown like starting Brock Glenn and Luke Kromenhoek like from the get-go and just going with youth all across the board early on. That's not true. Like they were looking at quarterback options in the transfer market before the ACC championship game. Like they were considering what that would be.
Yeah, we were
like
talking
chasing
about
DJ. Yeah.
We were talking about them taking a portal quarterback in November.
Yeah. Like you were always going to try to have a bridge quarterback and surround him with decent talent. Like that was always what your plan was going to be. So I dismiss the notion that the snub impacted them going youth movement like from the get-go. They were always going to try to be competitive this year.
I did like Zach's answer, by the way.
I did too. I felt that in real time. Like the emotional impact of this is beyond. It's messaging and trust in what the coach could say that would resonate with players. And that was kind of robbed from Mike Norvell. That's not his fault. Like that's what happened.
Me and Brendan grew up on heart and hustle with the Orlando Magic. We need tough and tested next year from FSU. Like the guys that do return, and there is a degree of carryover. I think one thing that happened this year was so many guys signed up for 13-0 FSU, and then when it began as 0-2 FSU, that didn't really work well for those guys because the skin wasn't in the game. I do think guys that have multiple years who care, who aren't just cashing a check, I think there's a degree of like there's buy-in that comes with that. I think this program has to have that as its backbone again. But yeah.
All right, let's get out of here. Sorry that your son's late to school. Sorry, Carson. Apologize. It's just school. Tardy slip. Who cares? All right, for Chris Nee, Zach Blostein, I'm Brendan Sonnone. This has been On the Bench. We'll talk to you guys later. Happy Halloween. Oh.